On the day the fairies came to burn the village, Walter was repairing the thatch on his roof. As he worked, he kept half an eye on the strangers who had arrived the previous evening. Walter didn't like the look of them, particularly the woman. She looked like the sort who sold water to ale and seduced men so she could rob and kill them while they slept. The group seemed to be waiting for something, and when the fairies rode out of the woods, Walter thought he knew what. The grass blackened and smoked in the hoof prints left by the shining crimson horses, and the hands of the fairy nobles were swathed in flames as always. Walter shouted the alarm, and the villagers ran for the church. He shifted to get off the roof, and his leg went straight through the damn thatch, trapping him. His warning shouts changed to cries for help, but the other villagers knew the rules. Run straight for the church. Stay in the church until the fairies have gone. Do not come out to help anyone, no matter who it looks and sounds like. Helpless, Walter watched his death approach as the priest began to ring the church bell. The strangers split up, the woman moving forward by herself and calling to the fairies in a language Walter didn't understand. For a moment he thought she was a spy for the fairies, but then the leader threw a bolt of flame and Walter thought she was merely dead. She wasn't. The fire that could destroy a house in a moment had left the woman completely unharmed. She spoke again, more loudly this time, gesturing at the fairy leader's horse as she did so. A moment later the horse shrieked, a dreadful high sound that went on, and bucked its rider off. The fairy got to his feet as the horse rolled, still screaming in agony, igniting small fires as it writhed. The woman spoke again, and this time the fairy listened. Walter couldn't understand what they were saying. The discussion went on for some time as the horse got to its feet, seemingly unharmed, and the woman's companions came forward to join her. In the end, some sort of agreement was reached, and the fairies turned and rode back into the forest. Walter watched the woman, clearly a witch of some sort, approach his house, looking up with an unpleasant smirk on her face. She spoke and gestured again, and Walter felt some force grab him. He was lifted off the roof, but then placed gently, standing on the ground in front of the witch. She spoke to one of her escorts, who then spoke to Walter. My mistress would like to talk to the priest and bailiff. Please bring them here. Walter did not feel like arguing, and ran to the church shouting that the fairies were gone. Welcome to Ars Magica. Dragons lair in the mountains, angels watch over the church, fairies dance in the forest, and demons tempt men and women to their ultimate downfall. The Magi of the Order of Hermes live in a world of mythic power, the world of mythic Europe. Welcome to that world. And welcome to Ars Magica. I'm DM Joe, and this is going to be a sort of review slash analysis of the game Ars Magica, The Art of Magic, 5th edition, created by Jonathan Tweet and Mark Rain-Hagen. Published by Atlas Games. This game has a bit of a storied history. The original versions were made by another studio, I believe White Wolf, a long time ago. During the 3rd edition run of the game, it was part of the World of Darkness series. It was Mage the Ascension. Sort of. Ars Magica has always been its own core game, set in a medieval version of a mythic Europe, one where the supernatural is just, the myths and beliefs that people believed in are just part of the world. While Mage the Ascension was clearly set in the modern time so that it coincided with things like Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse and so on and so on. However, after 3rd edition, it broke off into its own thing. It left, and as far as I'm aware, Mage the Ascension and Ars Magica are now completely separated products. Mage the Ascension is still a part of the World of Darkness, and I believe there's Mage the Awakening now for the Chronicles of Darkness, but it has very little connection to Ars Magica. There's still some legacy kind of carryover in the sense that in the Vampire the Masquerade and the new one for Chronicles, I don't know what it's called, does still have Clan Tremere as a vampire clan. And that reigns or originates from the fact that, in the case of Ars Magica, House Tremere is one of the houses for the mages in the medieval centuries, and at some point in the World of Darkness canon, they were, a house of mages, and then eventually they went their own way and became vampires, for reasons. It's a thing. We're not going to worry about that for now. For now, we're going to take a good look at Ars Magica. In my opinion, 5th edition Ars Magica is probably one of the greatest tabletop RPGs that has ever been made. It is phenomenally unique and interesting, and its mechanics are fascinating conceptually. Like, in my opinion, there are certain RPGs that are so unique and so interesting and thought provoking that they really do stand above the rest. Whether that's just they introduce a novel or unique way of doing what, tabletop nerds have always done, or they just refine it, right? Like, of course, D&D is D&D. It is the progenitor for most modern concepts of what an RPG even is, right? But you go even further, as far as like other games that have had similar impacts, you have, of course, like this one, Ars Magica. More recently, you have things like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game that added in the Genesis system with its narrative dice. I think that is a very unique and interesting system that has probably in some way will go on to influence a lot of future games that will do its own thing, that will do their own thing. And I mean, there's a lot of other games that are exceptionally fascinating. I mean, D&D with every iteration changes the landscape in a lot of ways. Um, but I'm getting off topic. So let's talk a little bit about what the fuck is Ars Magica and why might you want to play Ars Magica? Well, let's start with the setting. Ars Magica is very specifically set in a world of in our world, effectively. It's set in what it calls Mythic Europe, on page 199 of the core book. Mythic Europe is just quite literally our world, but it's simply that the ideas and beliefs of the people of the time are accurate. So, in the case of this takes place in about the 1200s, in 1220. So it basically works off of an assumption that if you were to take, the average opinion of people from Europe in the 1200s, for the most part, the things they believe in are real. They might not be exact, they might not always be accurate, but they are real. So the Christian God is real. Christianity and Judaism and the other Abrahamic faiths, they do worship the one true God. That is canon for this world. Fairies exist in the woods and, steal babies and, turn your crops to ashes and, fuck your shit up. And you gotta be really careful with them because they're tricksy and they'll plan like they're nice and then they'll fuck you over. Or they'll just fuck you over. And there are witches and wizards out in the woods doing shit and there's monsters and all that good stuff. I find this as a setting so fascinating because as someone who is personally invested or interested in the study of history and esoterica and the study of like how what the supernatural and folkloric beliefs of the people of the past, this is such a fascinating idea of getting to play in that world, right? When you think about fairy tales and fables and stuff from you know folk tales from the old days. You think about it, and they all seem to follow a certain common sense sort of logic, even though it's not real. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why do the fairies have to follow deals? Why do the fairies do tricks when they're literally magic? Why don't they just, I don't know, set you on fire and be done with you? Why do they gotta steal your name and all this other weird shit? And but generally folklores, even though they're so different, and you can take even one fairy tale story and there are hundreds of versions of it, hundreds of different versions of it, but they all still have some weird sense, this like vibe of consistency. It's not a hard rule book, it's more just if you read enough of them you kind of get the feeling of how they're supposed to go, so you can kind of tell when it makes sense. And that's what this game works off of. This game works off of, it takes that kind of a world, the world that exists in medieval folklore and fairy tales, and it's like that's what you're playing in. That's what you're playing. You're playing a medieval folktale slash fairy tale slash myth, right? So now let's get a little deeper. So I'm just going to go down the contents for the chapters, and I'm going to summarize what they basically are. I've read this book cover to cover. I'm going to be honest, I still don't fully understand a lot of the the nitpicky rules as far as like the actual math. That's it's one of those things where I need to just play it to get it, but I don't have a group to play it with. Like I don't have that many people that are that interested. I tried to play a game once, and all of my players for my table just didn't really mesh with it. I got like one player that's like really into it, and then the rest are just like, I'd rather play something else. And it's like, that's cool. That's cool. So the first big one, it's literally the second chapter here, is the Order of Hermes. So if you're playing Ars Magica, this is probably one of the most fundamental parts of the game that you're going to need to know when it comes to actually how play works, right? Because you're not just playing some random medieval peasant. That's not how it goes. It's not like we're just going to pick a fairy tale like, okay, we're doing Cinderella, you're Cinderella. It's like, no. In this world, it is entirely focused on the art of magic, hence the name. So the Order of Hermes in this setting is a, I mean, it's really just like a college or like a Hogwarts type situation. It is an organization of mages. In this world, since the dawn of the human race, magic and the supernatural has been a part of the world. It has always been there, and different cultures have come to different conclusions and ideas about how to do magic, and they've done magic. But there's a reason why you don't just have, not every king has a court mage, and you don't just have mages in every town like in D&D just running potion shops. That's not a thing here because what, in the real world, that would dramatically create an alternate history that changes everything. So the developers, when they first made this, they need to come up with an excuse as to why would any logical group of people just ignore the benefits of magic? Like, even if you have a religious reason, like, religion would change. It would adapt, right? Or even if it didn't, like, people would eventually just say, I think I'd rather just have the mage. So, the main reason is that there's multiple, but the main reason is that mages, those who can do magic, not just anyone can do magic. You can't just pick up a wand and start saying magic words and do magic. You have to be born with it. So it's already rare. Only a few people have the potential for magic. They have what's called the gift. And what the gift is not super defined. It's basically just this sort of spark in you, this cosmic force. A fun way to describe it would almost be like, it's like if your soul has a tumor. I don't know, but you basically have this thing about you called the gift that gives you the ability to do magic. It allows you to connect with the world in a way that is unique, that you can bend the world to your will through specific mediums and methods. And you can't just do whatever you want. You have to find a channel, a focus. But for the most part, there's a side effect, though. When you have the gift, it makes you different. And I don't just mean like because you can do magic. I mean people can tell there's something wrong with you. When you're around other people, they just look at you and they just get the fucking heebie-jeebies, worst vibes, and they just feel like, okay, something's not right with this guy. Like children who are born with the gift, like their parents, like 9 out of 10 times just say, yeah, no, this is not my child. This is a changeling. This baby's cursed. I'm just going to leave it in the fucking woods. And they leave you in the woods and you die. But sometimes they keep you. They power through it and they decide, no, I'm being crazy. Something's wrong with my kid, maybe, but maybe it's just me. And they power through and they keep you. And eventually they mostly get over it. At least in 5th edition, it is very explicitly stated that over enough time, the effects of the gift, the negative social effects of the gift, can be sort of worn down. It's not that they go away, it's just that if you spend enough time around someone, you'll kind of get used to it. You just kind of adapt to their weird vibes, and you just kind of accept that, they're a good person, even if they just kind of give you the creeps. It's like when you have that one friend that they're a good person, and you like hanging out with them, but they just kind of feel off, and you kind of just you feel weird hanging out with them, and they're just kind of creepy, but you power through because you have to for whatever reason. I don't know. I grew up with some weird people in school, so, but whatever. So, those with the gift, they have this social limit. And the thing is, everyone is impacted by it equally. It's not just like normal people get the heebie-jeebies. Even other mages get the heebie-jeebies from other mages, which means that magical communities are not really feasible. They're not practical, right? So, what ends up happening is for most mages, they run into the issue that if they try to hang out with each other, especially because by the time they're going to meet, they're going to be adults, right? They're going to be full grown adults with magic. And part of their whole thing is that because they can do magic, they often will become very obsessed with understanding their powers and their abilities and what they can and can't do. And they understand that it can kind of be taught to others. So it effectively promotes this sort of culture of, or did promote this culture of secrecy. That you can't just share your magic with anyone, because if you share your secrets of spells and magic, they could use it against you. Or if they find a good use for it, they might kill you so that you can't compete with them, right? So, and because you get bad vibes whenever you're around another mage, you can't help but become a little paranoid that, you can't trust them. They're going to hurt you because of the bad vibes. It fucks with your head. It's a psychological thing. So, mages just didn't get along. Most mages before the Order of Hermes, back in, the Roman times and shit, there was other magical societies and cults that existed before that, but they mostly were mystery cults that were bonded by religion, and they communicated mostly via letter. They didn't actually meet up in person that often. They mostly just wrote letters to each other because, an impersonal form of communication, so no heebie-jeebies. It's just from being in their presence, so they could communicate safely that way. And then once in a while, they'd meet up, power through it for the sake of, some ritual or some, spell or just a convenience or whatever, uh, conference, whatever. And, that's just what they did. But then comes along Bonasagus. And I'm going to go ahead and flip to the Order of Hermes page now to go over that. So, Bonasagus is the founder of the order. He was one who really got it, I think, started. Basically, one of the side effects of magic is there's no resistance to it. You have a little bit of a natural resistance to magic from how good you are in magic, but it's very minute. So if someone's going to cast a curse on you, there's not a lot you can do to prevent it. So that's another reason why mages had to be very careful and secretive, because they know how this works. If someone wants to put a curse on them, a lock of their hair, their fucking sock, just anything of theirs, their true name, all kinds of stuff like that can be used against them. So they can become paranoid, especially when you have to deal with fairies and shit and demons. So Bonasagus is doing his magic thing, and he discovers a method, a ritual that can be done that prevents him from, makes him resistant to magic. It's like a magical barrier or shield that once it's up, he becomes heavily resistant to all forms of magic. So if someone wants to cast a spell on him, or if he wanted to cast a spell on himself, there's a heavy resistance. Which, on the one hand, small downside means that spells that would heal the body or cure sickness, that's resisted too. So you'd have to take it down to do that, but that's a minor inconvenience. You can just take it down when you need to, but as long as you have it up, you are safe, mostly. So, someone wants to put a curse on you or throw a fireball at you, you've got some pretty decent protection to just resist it, to just nope. So, he figures this out. It's pretty cool. And his apprentice, a maga named Trianoma, is like, hey, buddy, that's pretty fucking cool. We could actually do something with that. And he's just like, okay, what are we gonna do? And she's like, look, I can go around, gather up some wizards from around the continent, and we could actually get like a magical society going on. Get our own fucking church going down. For mages. It's not a religious thing. Mages are Christian for the most part in most cases, but get an actual organization, a little bit of hierarchy and structure, and in the origin here, they go around and they collect about 12 other mages. So they gather Flambeau, Creaman, Bjornair, Guernicus, that's for Trianoma, Marinetta, Gerbiton, Titulus, Tromare, Verditus, Mercer, and Deedney, who's not listed here for a reason I'll get into. So they gather together, they go over the details of this magic, and basically come to an agreement that they'll form an organization together. He'll share with them the secrets of Parma Magica so they can protect themselves and they'll all be safe from each other. And one of the side effects of the Parma Magica, that shield, it's not just that when you have it on, you're immune to their magic, you're immune to their gift. So you're no longer given those heebie-jeebie vibes just by being around them. You can put on your Parma Magica, and then you can walk up to another mage and just be like, "Oh, you're just a dude. You're just a guy. You're not like freaky or weird or a monster. You're just Tom." And so with that, a gaggle of wizards could all put on Parma Magicas and then just have a normal conversation without getting the feeling like everyone's gonna stab them in the fucking throat. So that's what they do. They come together, they make a few concessions and agreements about how they're going to be run. There's a few complications, but they get through it, and they form the Order of Hermes. Now, some of those complications, I'm going to get to it, is with House Diadne. House, all of these houses, for the most part, are vast majority Christian, with 2 to 3 exceptions. The big 2 to 3 exceptions are that we have here. We have House Marinetta. House Marinetta is, I think, based in France, and they are heavily focused on studying the fairies and nature magic. Their original founder was just super, like a druid, just super in tune with nature and one with the natural world. They weren't part of any of the major religions. They just revered Mother Nature. But then down the road, that fascination and study shifted slowly away from just nature and into fairies specifically. They've got a whole complicated history I'm not going to get into, but it's really fucking fascinating. And the other one is House Bjornair. Bjornair. House Bjornair are based in Scandinavia. They're based on sort of Nordic kind of magic, and they are predominantly shapeshifters. They have a spirit animal, and they can shapeshift into that spirit animal. That is like the unique trait of their magic that they figured out. And again, because they're based predominantly in like a more Scandinavian Nordic territory, they're also not Christian. They're also technically heathens. So, and then finally the missing one, Diadne, based in Ireland, were actually druids basically. When everything was being formed, Bonasagus went to the druids of Ireland and tried to offer them to join, and all of them, they were all independent tribes and their own little things, and they were just like, "No, we're good. Go fuck yourself." And Diadne was the only one that was like, "You know what? Fuck it, I'm in," and gathered up her followers and joined. Even though they were heathens, they weren't Christian. They followed the old gods and pagan gods and such. But she figured, fuck it, I want in on this magic, so joined. There's a lot of details about House DNA we just don't really know about, that's not really fleshed out, and that's partially intentional. The game gives hints about DNA, and a lot of the information they give is hearsay, rumors, and what the history says, but it might not necessarily be true. And it kind of is up to you as the GM or as the storyteller to decide what is true for House DNA. Was House DNA, you know, an evil cult of diabolists and devil worshippers, that were tricked by some Nephilim or whatever that they thought was just an old god, or were they genuinely just devout religious pagans worshiping their local deities, that were harmless, and they were just persecuted because of their religious differences? So you might notice DNA is not on this list. That's because one of the major historical events for the game, at least as far as the default timeline you take place in, is that in the relatively recent past, House DNA was excommunicated, the whole house, and a civil war broke out between the Order of Hermes and House DNA specifically. Why the war broke out is a bit complicated, but it basically boils down to that they were accused of engaging in satanic rituals and that they were using their magic to conjure and make deals with demons and other dark magic. And apparently it was enough that, they were just declared excommunicated. They've broken our laws. They must be destroyed. And the houses of Hermes is basically either either sided with kill them all or I'm not getting involved in this bullshit. And they had very few allies that were willing to really fight for them. Bjornair and Marinetta were the only two really willing to help, but not even then in full swing. Marinetta basically just provided sanctuary and shelter, but didn't necessarily engage in that much fighting, from what I understand. And while Bjornir did engage in fighting, they're just enough out of the way and kind of disinvolved with the entire order as it is that when DNA was finally wiped out, and Bjornir basically kind of and Marinetta basically took in the refugees and the survivors into their orders secretly. The rest of the order was just so tired from the war that they just said fuck it and just like fine, we can have them and just let it be. Again, a lot of this is just vaguely what's told, but might not all necessarily be 100% accurate. So I'm really summarizing, and some of what I'm summarizing might not be fully true. Because what I'm also partially remembering is from a lot of both the lore in this book, some of the expansion books, and I even bought a few like little like homebrew things called Sub Rosa that makes additional content. It's really cool. There's some really neat stuff in there. But yeah, so the Schism War is the big thing as far as recent history goes. I think the book here says the Schism War started. When did it start? Okay, it's the by the time 1220 starts, the last Magi who can remember the war have died or passed into their final twilight, and memories of the terrible time are fading. So basically, there's no one left alive currently that remembers it really. So it's kind of like us and World War One. So yeah, so the Order of Hermes. These are the houses. They all have their own unique little quirks and traits and histories and such, and as a player, what you need to really know about the Order of Hermes is that if you make a character, when you make a character, uh, you have to pick a house to be a part of. That is the default rules. By default, the game assumes that you will be playing as a mage from the Order of Hermes as your primary character. And when you make them, you'll have to choose which house are you a part of. And each house will come mechanically with different bonuses. Bjornair comes with their heart beast ability, so you can become a shapeshifter and turn into your spirit animal, whatever that is. House Flambeau is heavily focused on aggressive combat magic and fire magic and things like that. Bonus Sagas are like researchers and such, and they have the unique perk within the orders like politics that a Bonus Sagas mage is allowed to just confiscate apprentices from other mages. So if you are a Flambeau mage and you have an apprentice and your apprentice is really smart and he's really good at what he does, a Bonus August mage can just decide this guy's being wasted being trained by you. I'm taking him and now he's my apprentice and I'm going to train him. So, which is hilarious in my opinion. I don't know. It'd be like if you're working at a Publix or something, and like there's a manager from another Publix who just has unlimited power, and like he can just come over and just steal any one of your employees if he feels that they'd be better at his store. I don't know. That's a horrible analogy, but that's all I can come up with. House X Miscellanea is, as the name says, the miscellaneous house. So all the other houses were founded by a specific mage who organized things, and I know I said Trianoma, but Trianoma was an apprentice. She wasn't a founding member per se, even though she's really responsible for a lot of the shit that got this going. But House Miscellanea, or yeah, Ex Miscellanea, Miscellanea, Miscellanea. Um, the thing with them is that they're basically just literally the oddball house. So all the other houses are founded by these members, and all the mages by now are, if you're a mage and you're in one of these houses, you've been trained by someone who is also most likely from that house, who was trained by someone from that house, who was trained by somebody from that house, with a few minor exceptions here and there. Miscellanea is basically where pre-existing magical organizations that agree to join the order go. So let's say you were a member of like a small-time cult, not even a cult, just like a literal like circle of just like people who could do magic that weren't real proper wizards, just living in the woods in the middle of nowhere, just doing your own thing, maybe worshiping your pagan god or something, and or just revering like an author that wrote a magic book from like 1,000 years ago, and you're just really into it. And the order shows up, explains everything to you, and your whole group decides to join. Because you weren't trained by these houses, adapting to them could be very difficult as an adult. So instead, you get to join House X Miscellanea as basically because they have no limitations or rules. Anyone's allowed to join their house. They're really relaxed and they're basically just, hey, if you're a mage but you don't have the particular quirks for these other houses and shit, you weren't trained by them, and even if you don't need to have been trained by them, you just don't care for their vibe and you want to keep doing your own thing, you stay in X Miscellanea. You just join here, and then you can just do your own thing and keep being your own little independent thing, and it's just you technically belong to the order. So, yay! The other houses all have fun quirks. Some of them are really political. Some of them are focused on crafting magic items. Some of them are literally the mailmen. And some of them, while not entirely, are vast majority the police. The Quezator, house, they're not a house. The Quezator are the magic police, so to speak. They're investigators that go around the order to make sure that nobody's breaking the laws of the Order of Hermes. And if they catch you breaking the law, they'll bring you to trial and deal with you. So they're magic cops basically. And Guernicus started the whole Quezator, but anyone's allowed to be in the Quezator. It's not limited to them. But because he ended up founding it, he trained his apprentices in such a way that the vast majority of Quezators are from House Guernicus. But technically, anyone from any house can go and get titled as a Quezator as long as they meet the conditions. So yeah, fun times. So the way it basically works in universe for a character is you're born somewhere in some village somewhere or some town, and you have the gift, and your parents don't leave you for the wolves, or maybe they do leave you for the wolves, right? Whatever happens, somewhere along the way, whether you were left in the woods or you were left out on the streets or you were raised but everyone just hated you, at some point a mage from the Order of Hermes finds you, right? So for mages, they need apprentices. They need to be able to pass on their legacy and their training and stuff. And I mean, it's not like they absolutely have to. There's no rule that says you must have an apprentice, but most of them want to be able to pass on because they know they're going to die and they'd like their research and their study of magic, their particular ideas, and their legacy to pass on. So they need an apprentice. Also, as you get older, having a younger mage to help you in your dying years, I mean, it's the same reason some people have kids. So the mages, they just find a kid that's like, all right, I'm gonna go find some kid with the gift. So they just start wandering around town to town, village to village. Maybe they have spells and stuff to help them find one. But either way, they find someone with the gift. Maybe it's a baby in the woods, maybe it's a baby on the street, maybe it's like a 5-year-old kid running around homeless or otherwise abused by his family because he's got the gift and everyone just kind of instinctively hates him. And you're just like, hey, Harry, you're a wizard, I'm taking you to Hogwarts. And for the most part, you don't have a choice. I'm just going to wipe your parents' memory so they don't remember, and I'm just going to take you. Or I'm just going to pay them off. I'm just going to give them a bag of gold, and they'll be fine with it. Oh, yeah, gold means nothing to me. I can just magic up some gold if I really want to. I'm not supposed to do that, but I think for the purpose of buying a mage, I think the Quezators will look the other way. I'll get into all that later. So that's pretty much what it is. They go out, they find some kid, they pick him up, bring him back, and just start raising him as a mage. So that's the vast majority. Some people join the order in adulthood, but that usually comes with some complications. Um, and once you become an official member, you gotta swear the oath. So here's the oath, and it's basically the magic constitution, effectively. It's the basic guideline of rules that you have to follow as a mage. And when a mage breaks the law and is put on trial and punished, it's usually because they broke the oath in some way. There are additional laws and rules that aren't part of the oath, but they're mostly extrapolations from the oath. So one of the lines here in the Oast is, "I will not endanger the order through my actions." That's here. Um, Nor will I interfere with the affairs of mundanes, normal people without magic, and thereby bring ruin on my Sodalis, which is your magic family, the mages that raise you and train you and bring you up, as well as their friends and their apprentices. Um, yeah, so that line right there basically is the backbone for a lot of the laws in universe for the Order of Hermes of what mages are and aren't allowed to do, because like there are some interpretations in some of the books that say like, oh well, because of this, it's the order would probably arrest any player characters that decide to like try to accrue massive amounts of like contemporary wealth. Like they try to like mass produce gold and then start buying whole fucking cities and shit, and building temples and just trying to stuff like that, right? To a certain degree, it's expected that you'll use your magic to make wealth in order to help out the order, but it's generally expected that you don't want to interfere too much with the mundane world, because you go fucking with it too much and it might lead ruin. You start mass producing gold to like, buy a bunch of stuff for the order, and then that maybe fucks up the currency, and then maybe the local lord gets pissed off. He starts organizing soldiers and stuff and finds excuses and, convinces the church to like acknowledge your existence and declare you as heathens, and it's a whole thing, right? And there's parts of this book that go over that. It's called the peripheral code, where it's just like taking the lines and being like, okay, well, because of that, that means also, obviously dealing with demons is in there. Anyone caught summoning a demon or making a deal with a demon, that's instant, like, instant death sentence. Like, they can just be hunted down and killed. Molesting the fairies is a line in there, and it's borderline not enforced at all, because fairies and like the places where they live are really good sources of a thing called vis, which is basically like the main source of magic. It's your magic currency. It's mana. So going into fairy circles and picking their mushrooms or capturing sprites and clipping their wings and shit like that is like a big primary source of magic. So because of that, uh, this one's it's kind of enforced in the sense of, if you start fucking with fairies too much, that they're gonna start bringing ruin upon your house, then that's bringing ruin upon your Sodalis. That's molesting fairies. They'll punish you. But as long as you can do it without getting caught, you're no problem. Um, yeah. Interfering with mundanes, it's pretty complicated. Apprentices, scrying, tribunals, blah blah blah. The tribunals are meetings that happen like every couple of years, where all the mages for like a region will have to like gather together to like vote on laws and stuff. So they don't have like representatives, right? It's a direct democracy in the mages because they're a small enough population that they can get away with that. So once you become a mage, you're allowed to go to the tribunal and you're allowed to vote. Sometimes, some houses have special restrictions on voting, but that's unique to them. So again, you'll have to read up on the houses specifically to figure out which one you would want. So I'm just talking about the world and the book. So beyond that, right? So that's a lot of the lore out of the way. I'm not going to get too much deeper into the lore. Let's get back into the mechanics of how the game works. So, like I said, when you make a character, you are for the most part a magi. You are a mage of the order. Uh, there are rules for playing as an apprentice mage, but for the most part, this is your main character. And I say main character because you play multiple characters in this. Now, it's not a one person game, although you could run it that way. It's a troop style game. For those who have not played a troop style game, what it basically boils down to is, instead of you taking on the role of a singular character, you take on a multitude of characters. And over the course of an adventure, you will occasionally swap out those characters. Sometimes you might play more than one character at a time. So, for someone who's played D&D, an example of where something like this might happen in D&D might be, let's say you're playing a character. You're playing a fighter, and your fighter dies. Oh, tragic. And you make a new character to play. So you make a barbarian, and you're playing that barbarian. And then later down the road, for story reasons, the fighter's brought back from the dead. He's back. And now you have to choose, who are you playing. And there might be a bit of an awkward moment for like a session or two, or maybe just for a few minutes, where you're technically having to play both characters in a scene because they're both alive and they're both in the same room together. And for most purposes, most DMs would say, okay, pick which one you want, and we'll come up with an excuse why the other one has to fuck off and go do their own thing and retire while we, you can now play whichever character you're picking, right? That is the vast majority of the time, what happens. But in this case, it is expected that you will be playing multiple characters at a time. Now, for the Magi, you only get one. That is a hard rule for the game for the most part. You get one Magi. There's no resurrection in this game. If you die, you die. So your other characters, though, that you get to play and you will cycle around through are you get a companion. Usually, also, you'll only get one companion. And then you get Grogs. So a companion is any character that is not a magus but is important. This could be a noble knight or a contemporary scholar. Maybe they're an alchemist or a scientist, but they don't have the gift. They're ungifted. Or, maybe they're a noble. Maybe they're like, some noble blood royal that's like lower down in the line of succession. So they're just trying to find something to do, right? So, in general, the way this game works is it focuses heavily on the story. So, Magi are meant to be main characters, they're protagonists. Companions are meant to be important, but secondary characters, right? They're deuteragonists, they're supporting cast, things like that. Grogs are meant to be communal. In general, a Grog, when you have in your troop, will be a bucket of dozens of background characters that anyone is allowed to just grab them and play. So, an example, right, of a session could be that the let's say we have a party of 3 people, right? We're going to say one of them is playing their Magi, one of them is playing their companion character, and the other one is playing all of the Grogs in the group, right? Just because for whatever reason they didn't feel like playing either their mage or companion for this session. So let's say that the Magi and the companion are on a quest to go visit a library in Alexandria. I think actually this time the library of Alexandria is gone, but actually it's probably gone. So let's say they're going to Venice. They're going to go to Venice because there's a book collection there that this one noble has, and they want to see it. So their entourage on their way there while they're traveling is the Magi, the companion, who let's say is a knight, and the Grogs are all the servants, all the miscellaneous people. Maybe there's a bard, maybe there's a couple of just regular lay servants that just, help carry things and move things around. Maybe there's a few generic bodyguards. They're men at arms, they're fighters, but they're not knights. They're not nobles. Maybe you got a handful of characters that serve other roles for the group, but otherwise they're borderline unnamed, unimportant background characters. Now, you might think, why would I want to play a character who's not important to the story? And to that, I would say, why wouldn't you? Think about it. Your character, say you're doing a group, right? The Magi is the protagonist. They have to be the protagonist. Whatever the story is, they're the ones who have to direct the narrative. They have to be the one pushing the story forward. They're the one who wants to go to this library to read these magic books in order to fulfill an ancient prophecy or something, or whatever, or because they want to kill a dragon. And the companion is there to support them because they swore an oath or something. Meanwhile, as the guy who's playing the Grogs in this scenario, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? You can cut loose. You can just be like, you know what? I have decided I am going to be a grumpy, angry washerwoman today who is upset that the mage keeps getting their robes dirty and is going to give them a scolding about it. Or I'm going to play as one of the men at I'm going to play 2 of the men at arms, and I'm going to have a full-on conversation with myself, bitching and complaining about how fucking insane my job is, and that, I have to be a bodyguard for a fucking wizard, right? Or you don't have to be bitchy. Maybe you want to play something more lighthearted. You play the bard. You decide, for this scene, I'm going to go ahead and, be the voice of the bard and just crack some jokes, maybe, sing a little rhyme and stuff and make suggestions about maybe a song I'm working on, flirt with the barmaid, stuff like that, right? In the case of a grog, they can be anything, right? You can make all kinds of excuses, and there's no set. Sorry, they're not a preset character. They can be whatever you want them to be. So that just makes them a blank page, right? Most of the times, the game suggests that when you make the character sheets for these things, right, for your magi and your companion, you're going to go into real detail about fleshing out their characters and their history and their lives and their families or whatever, or anyone important to them. The grogs, it basically says get out the raw numbers of a character that you would need in the case of like combat, like in case someone attacks them or they have to fight, like those numbers and shit, and maybe like their like raw skill numbers. But as far as like personality and background, do not bother. Leave that shit blank. Like you could fit a grog on a fucking index card, and I have done that. I have made index cards that are just the grogs and just filled them out. So you make your grogs, and then you just basically just hand them out. Just like, okay, you just make up characters on the spot. I will say this is very much not a game for everyone. In fact, I would say this is a game that is perfect if you have a group of DMs. And what I mean by that is quite literal. If you have a bunch of people who are all very used to being dungeon masters, they're used to being the DM, and you wanted to give them a game where they could still utilize those skills but still get to be players, this is the perfect game for them. This is an oops all DMs, all GMs fucking game, which kind of makes it impossible to play because how many gaggles of GMs are there? I am I have I know one person right now, my wife, who GMs, and she's new to it. I have a friend who I have not gotten to play D&D with in for fucking ever, who also occasionally, once in a blue moon, GM'd, and our schedules have not lined up for years now, so they're not an option. So it's already hard enough to get just a group of players together. Now imagine trying to get a group of GMs specifically together. I'm not saying you have to be a GM to enjoy this, but the way this game runs, every time I read it, the more I realize that if I had a group of GMs, they would love this. Now, I have run troop style games for D&D, Pathfinder specifically. I ran a Pathfinder game and I ran it troop style. I was going for more of like an old school hack and slash kind of RPG situation, proper dungeon crawl, and I had each of the players make just a handful of characters, just make multiple characters. Now, in this case, because it was Pathfinder, they did make full-on characters. They fleshed them out backstory-wise, and I basically just kind of gave them general guidelines of trying to make the characters mostly either all of them had to be connected to each other, or they all had to be completely disconnected from each other. That was my general guideline of like how they should think about it. Like, okay, like this is like my wife, for example, she made a family. Her main character was the mom, and then all of her secondary characters were her kids. So she was this Ifrit Oracle lady, and she just had a bunch of fucking kids. So that's one way to do it. And then everyone else, it was either families or it was like they were just all complete strangers and didn't even know each other. So when you do that, the general expectation is that you're going to run troop style games kind of like a West Marches game, where uh, everyone gathers together whenever and they pick out which character they want to play that week, and then they go to a dungeon or something, and then once that's over, they just go their separate ways, and then next week you can pick the same character or another character, and then that group, whoever, is going to go on another adventure. For me, I did that with Rapanathic, so the party's troop was basically like a whole fucking guild of adventurers just dive bombing into Rapanathic over and over again. And they had their primary characters, their main characters that got all the real attention, but they had secondary characters they could switch to for shits and giggles because, oh, we scouted that floor out last session and we know it's full of undead, so I'm going to switch to my paladin back, side character, put my wizard away because I feel like a paladin would be more helpful here, stuff like that. So if you wanted to take troop style and use it in a regular RPG, totally doable. So as far as the rest goes, that's the basic framework spine of the game, right? You make your magi, make your companion, and make your grogs. I would recommend if you do this, make your magi, have everyone make their magi together ideally so they can, work around each other to like make things that are unique so they don't have too much overlap. And then when everyone makes a companion, instruct them to everyone, like basically get them in a big circle and be like, make your companion as someone who is tied to the person on your left's magi. Right? Like just get a big circle and be like, okay, look at the person on your left, take that person's magi, your companion is their companion, their backup, their bodyguard, their friend, their whatever, right? Tie it to them in some way. That way you have a reason to like, split things up. So you're not necessarily always playing both of your characters at the same time and instead, you're like, okay, since my magi's going out, you'll bring your companion and I'll bring his magi, and that means you'll bring your companion, divide it up a little bit. It works best if you have an even group, I think, but the advantage with this is it helps with power balance because magi are powerful. This is not a combat game. This is not a game that intends for you to be fighting monsters every week, right? This is very much a storytelling game, a real role play kind of game. And it shows that because magi are fucking terrifying. A decently leveled magi, if they've specialized in an area, they can be godlike. Like they're like you can very easily build a character, a magi, who can just burn a city to the ground by themselves, no help needed, just turn a city to ash, right? Which is just awesome. So what I generally recommend, though, is for balance purposes, when they're going to go out on a proper adventure, limit the party to maybe 1 to 3 magi, depending on the size of your group, right? Like, try to restrict it as much as you can, really, to have as few magi as possible. Like, minimum 1 magi, right? Minimum 1. But definitely set a max 2. Because, in general, think of it this way. The Magi are literally meant to be protagonists. The story is meant to revolve around them because the companions are generally, while they have their own stories, they're with the party in the first place because of the Magi. They're there to get their help or to help them in some way. Well, the Grogs are just background characters. They're just whatever. Hell, you could totally have a background character be someone who wasn't even with the party. They're just like a local in the town they happen to go into. And just like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and pull out of the hat. They're the local blacksmith because I pulled out a blacksmith card. That's or a sheet. That's what I have. So they're the local blacksmith. They're going to chat with you and then go there. So by restricting it, you can then focus on the Magi narratively. So it's almost basically like, imagine if when you're doing a troop style game, you're kind of going a bit of a round robin situation where it's like, okay, which of you is the main character for the day? And it's okay, Jim, you are the main character for this session, and next session will be Sarah's turn to be the main character. We're going to focus on her story, right? And you're alternating, and you're giving everyone a turn and a chance to do their thing. And I think, in a way, because that's basically what I did for the Pathfinder, what I did with troop style, and it allows for everyone to get their time to shine, right? It gives everyone a chance to be in the center of attention, to be the spotlight and be the protagonist without everyone else feeling cheated because it's like, well, I didn't get to do anything. It's like, well, next week you get to be the protagonist. We're all going to pay attention to you. This is definitely a kind of game that works better when you have long-term stability. This is not a sit down, drop in the middle of nowhere kind of game. This is a, we're going to set this up and then we're going to be playing this for the next like 2 years kind of thing, right? Like, or whatever long stretch of time. Right? This is a, we're going to play weekly for the next 6 months. We're going to play bi-weekly for the next year, right? To like really give everyone time and a chance to grow. And the thing about this game is time is a very important element. So I'm going to get moving to another one of the mechanics that is heavily focused on time. And that is, hold on, decrepitude, and it's the Wizard's Twilight. So Twilight is a thing unique to mages. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the contents. So in this world, for a mage, you don't just get old and die. I mean, you can, but What is more likely to happen is there is a ritual and spell you can do to prolong your life, to extend your life longer. And what happens is that as you play the game and as you do magic, whenever you critically fail, right? Whenever like things really go wrong, you get a little bit of twilight. You basically sort of take on a sort of magical corruption. You lose a little bit of your humanity to the magic. And as you get older, and you do this again and again and again, and certain rituals and spells will also, peak away at your twilight, eventually you'll hit a point, both either because of old age or because of a spell gone awry or whatever, that you will enter what's called the Wizard's Twilight. And during the Wizard's Twilight, you sort of fade out of reality. The way it's described in the book here is that you basically almost turn into like a statue. You just freeze in a moment of time, and no one can touch you, interact with you. You're like a fucking statue. You're stone, basically. Not really, but harder than stone, if anything. And you just sort of disappear for a bit. Like it gets a little fuzzy depending on what you actually experience. It's like some of the books kind of say like, oh, it's like you enter like a higher realm of existence, and you like see things and you experience almost like a divine experience, but with magic. Like you see like the true nature of reality in a way, but then you come back to normal and you have no idea what the fuck's going on. You're just kind of confused, and your head hurts, and everything's a little fuzzy. And you can get twilight scars, which is basically marks that you've entered into a twilight. And each time you enter into a twilight, there's a higher and higher chance that you'll never come back. So, effectively, mechanically, I'm going to simplify it. The way it works is you have some stats, and you have to roll twilight. So you roll, and it basically determines how long you're in the twilight for, right? And maybe it's like you're in the twilight for 5 minutes, you're in the twilight for 2 hours, you're in the twilight for 6 days, you're in the twilight for a year, right? And then each time you have to roll it, you basically get a bonus effectively, which is bad. The higher you roll, the longer you have to stay in the twilight, and each time you have to roll it, you get a bonus to it, so that way your minimum gets smaller and small. Your minimum goes higher and higher and higher, so you're spending longer and longer in Twilight until eventually you roll high enough that it's just you enter Final Twilight. You disappear forever. You basically sort of fall out of reality itself and just disappear into the background radiation of the cosmos. And at that point, your body literally just like fucking Ben Kenobi, fucking like Obi-Wan in A New Hope, getting hit with the lightsaber. You just disappear, just gone. Fucking just leave behind your robes and your lightsaber. So, you've vanished into thin air, disappear, gone forever, blah blah blah, and that's it. Your character's dead. They're gone. You can also just die normally. You get shot with a crossbow or blown up or something. Um, and the thing is, the game works off the intention that you're going to play for, in game speaking, decades, like a long ass time. It One of the big core mechanics of the game is the laboratory mechanics. So in between adventures, it's supposed to be like you're doing magic, doing your thing, and then you take a break from your adventure, and during those breaks you're studying and researching, developing new spells and new magic. You're experimenting, and in which case it breaks it down into seasons. So it's like, okay, during the entire winter of this year, you just experiment and you develop this new spell, or you develop these new innovations or whatever. You improve these old spells in this way, whatever it is, right? And I mean, that's a whole winter. That's 3 months, right? So, and then that's just how it goes. You just go through again and again and again, just, adventure, and then a break for like a couple of months, and then adventure, and then a break for a couple of months, or maybe even a couple of years. That kind of depends on your game master of how long in between adventures. Some might like to have, like, years and years of like, so that way they can really level up their characters because they do all this research and improve their shit. That's another big thing. In this game, you don't level up by going on adventures. Going out on an adventure and, beating a dragon doesn't award you like a bunch of XP that then levels you up. Instead, going out on an adventure and killing a dragon provides you resources, and then you spend those resources to level up by, doing science and magic and studying and practicing for like 2 years. It's actually, funnily enough, a lot in a way like what a D&D was kind of implying. In old editions, like original Dungeons and Dragons, they didn't have XP. Instead, you got gold, and you spent that gold to level up. Gold was XP. XP was gold. And the idea was that in between sessions, you spent the gold you earned from your adventure to pay for trainers to teach you so that you could level up and gain new skills. Now, that's not really what we do anymore for lots of reasons. It doesn't really help with, instant gratification and such. But it is an interesting, system here. It's because it's not just pure money, right? Like when you go on an adventure and you kill a dragon and stuff, you get resources, and you could spend those resources on new spells and research and rituals and stuff that maybe help you in one way or another. But it's just the fact that you just basically go through months or years of practice in between sessions, and that's just where you get your experience because it's literally just based on how old you are. So it's just fascinating. Okay, so but yeah, it's just a fascinating and different kind of system where leveling up isn't really a thing. It's just your experiences, like literally by spending time out of game. And as you spend time out of game doing your research in your laboratory and doing your stuff, you improve the covenant, which is the party basically. Each party is assumed to have a base, a covenant where you do your magic shit, where you have your whole little base of operations. Maybe it's a castle or a tower, or I don't know, maybe it's a hole in the ground. I mean, that's the base of it, right? You have your going down the list. You have the order of harmonies I've gone over. I've gone over characters. Virtues and flaws is one of the ways that you build your character. So when you make your character and you pick your stats, you then also pick some virtues and flaws. In terms of D&D, these are kind of like feats, and then flaws are anti-feats. You get some kind of boast, some kind of, benefit, and then some kind of negative. So some of them are mundane. Some of them are, like certain kinds of combat training or whatever, and others are supernatural. One of the virtues that's probably the most important that you should know exists are the ones related to the gift. So there's a virtue called the gentle gift, which is that you have the gift, but you don't have the social effect. You can be around people and they're not bothered by you. And there's like the blatant gift, which is like it's 10 times fucking worse. You get around normal people and they're terrified of you. They instantly hate you. Animals don't like you, like shit like that. Um, Abilities are kind of same category. It's just like stuff like that. Covenants, hermetic magic, and spells. Okay, so I'm gonna get into the thing that actually makes this the best game ever. Like this is the reason this game matters. This is why this game is known by so many people, and yet at the same time, it's so underappreciated. The magic system for this game, when you play as a mage, the magic system is the most unique thing about it. I think I'm actually going to probably move this to the beginning of the video just so that way I can get right to the good stuff. But hermetic magic, I'm going to skip to the page, is a noun and verb system. So when you are doing magic, you pick two things: the form and the technique. So the form is your verb. So there's creo, I create, intelligo, I perceive, muto, I transform, perdo, I destroy, and rego, I control. So when you're making your spell, you pick one of those five things. You are doing something. You are either making something, perceiving something, transforming something, controlling something, or destroying something. And then you pick the noun or the technique. Or sorry, form. Yeah, the form. So you have animal, self-explanatory, it's animal. Aquam, water. Aurum, air. Corpus, body. Herbum, plant. Ignum, fire. Imaginem, image. That one's weird, and I'll get into that. Mentum, mind. Terram, earth. And vim, or power. So you combine any of these two, right? So it's like, you could do creo aqua. I create water. That is now going to make a spell that makes water. And what that actually then interprets to literally is up to you when you make the spell. So you make your version of a create water spell, your creo aquam spell. Let's say you make it a 50th level spell. I don't know. the spell here system, it works on basically a 0 to 100 rating. So you basically take your skill or the skill required in the verb and noun, add them together. That's basically what it boils down to. So a Creo Aquam spell could be anything from making a cup of water, like just spawning enough water to fill a cup and refilling your canteen, to literally making it rain, to literally making a flood, right? Like how much water you make is just a matter of how much power you're putting in it, and it's not that flexible like in the moment. Like you can't just be like, okay, I'm gonna do Cryo Aqua and I'm gonna put 200 points into it, so I'm just gonna flood the world. No, you have to make the spell during your lab time and character creation. And when you make the spell, you determine how many points did you put into it when you made the spell, and then that's it. And you're gonna still spend that mana when you do it, but that's it. You can modify it on the fly. There's a mechanic for it. It's a lot harder. It's spontaneous magic, but not important. So with these 5 verbs and these 10 nouns, you can basically do anything, right? And the complicated ones, really, in my opinion, are the intelligo and the imaginem. So intelligo is perception. It's your scrying magic. It's your ability to either see or learn something about something, right? So, and intelligo aquam would be I perceive water. So maybe it's like you use it to be able to see where the nearest source of water is, to detect water. An intelligo vim spell, or I perceive power, could be used to locate people with the gift, to see power, to see magic, or whatever. Um, and then you have imaginem. So this one's a bit weird because, again, this world is based on medieval logic, right? It uses the science and understanding of the world that the medieval people had. And in medieval times, they didn't understand how light worked. They were under the impression that when you perceived something, like an image or a sense, right, that your body sent out these like particles, basically called speckies. So your eyes shot out speckies, and they'd go out and they'd hit things, and then they'd come back to tell your brain what they saw or what they found, and that's how you see. Or the same with like all your other senses. It's like it's your body sends out little feelers to then report back the information to you. Um, we now know that's not really how it works. We have our bodies use various systems to just detect naturally occurring things and interpret them. So, um, when you're doing spells with Imaginem, it's not just the literal image. Imaginem means the senses of a thing, right? So when you're Creo Imaginem, you're creating not just an image per se, you're creating something that has sensational data. So it means that you can use Creo Imaginem to make something not just look a certain way, but you can make something that feels a certain way, or tastes a certain way, or smells a certain way. Imaginem is anything to do with the senses, really. So, ironically, a intelligo imaginem, or I perceive image spell, would actually most likely be a way to see past illusions, to see through them, to like, I want to see the real thing, something like that. But Creo or Muto, so transforming, controlling, creating an image or senses. Again, yeah, it's just not just the look. It's also the touch and the feel and stuff. Like if you used Creo Imaginem, you could make like a fake wall, and anyone who sees the wall would see it. That's a wall. They could touch it. They'd feel like there's a wall there. Their body would respond like there's a wall there, so they wouldn't be able to just push through it, right? Because their body would tell them it's stone, so it would feel like a wall, but it's not really there, right? So, like, hypothetically, you make this fake wall, someone touches it, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's a wall. But if they tried to lean on it, like, actually put, like, their weight on it, like, so they were unbalanced, they'd fall right through it. Because it's not really there. They'd feel like it's there. The parts of them are touching it would feel like it's there, but they just slip right through if they really, you know, like, threw themselves at it or put themselves on in a way that, like, their body wouldn't, like, instinctively correct itself. So, yeah. So, yeah, you got the elements, mind, body, spirit, animals and plants, stuff like that. And yeah, that's really it. That really is the basis of it. You combine those things and you make any spell you want. You pick and make up your own spells. The rules are a little complicated. There's a lot of little details that go into determining your spell, because what matters is what is the spell's level, because that's how much mana you have to spend to cast it, and that matters a lot. Because unlike in most games, you don't have spells per day, and you don't regenerate mana. Mana, or vis, or technically it's pronounced Whis, but I'm going to say Vis. Vis is your magic currency. It's a physical substance that you use to cast magic. So, say I want to make my Creo Ignum spell to make fire, to make a fireball. I'm going to need a source of both Creo and Ignum Vis. I need a source of Vis to fuel both my fire magic and creation power. So I need to go out and get it. And how you go out and get it is you have to hunt for it. And that's what most adventures are about. Most adventures are about finding a good source of Vis. Maybe that's raiding a fairy circle, or killing a dragon, or maybe there just happens to be a hill that for some reason has a lot of good sources of Vis on it, and you just got to go make sure you can claim before anyone else does. Right? So that is that. Now, there are a few other things to know about magic, since it's going to be very important. There are the limits. There are rules to magic. There are laws that cannot be broken. And these are not laws of the order. These are laws of the universe, right? This is your laws of physics shit. So the first one is the limit of the divine. Basically, God is all powerful, and magic means nothing in the face of God. What this basically means is that things that are divine, that are related to the church and God, are resistant to magic, and the closer they are to God, the more resistant they are. There's a table in here. I'll probably find it later, but basically shows that, like, if you were trying to cast a spell out in the open versus in a church, it's different. Churches are holy ground, so casting magic there is harder, because God's mere blessing and presence of a church means that it resists your magic. It kind of holds it in. So you can't do a lot of magic. And if you went to, like, a cathedral, like a big one in a major city, that's even worse. And if you went to fucking Jerusalem, get the fuck out of here. And so on and so on. The other one is the limit of essential nature. This one's a bit weird. So what it basically boils down to is that all things have a certain essential true nature to them, right? So your body is a human body. Now, I can use magic to turn you into an animal, but you'll only stay an animal so long as I am providing power to fuel the spell. If I let go of the spell, you will go back to your true form, because your true form is kind of like always tugging at you, trying to pull you back to your essential nature. So if I turn you into a newt, you will get better. The lesser limits are the things that, according to the order in universe, these are things that the mages in universe, they know about and they say are limits, but every wizard and their fucking mother is trying to break it, right? Everyone's like, this, we think this is a rule, but there might be a way around it. These are the only two that are absolute, that as far as the GM is concerned, you have to follow these to some degree. You can't break these. These, as the GM, for the sake of the game, if you want to let your players find a workaround to get through them, that's fine. So, the limit of aging, there is magic that can preserve you and prevent you from aging, but you can't go backwards. Your age is a part of your essential nature, effectively. So if I use magic to turn you into a child, once the spell ends, you go back to the way you were. Changing your essential nature like that is not really possible, as far as we know. There might be a way, like the Philosopher's Stone, the elixir of life, alchemy type shit, but officially no. The limit of arcane connections. So this is barely true. What it basically means is that when you want to do magic on something, you need a connection to that thing, right? I can't just curse the Pope, right? Or that's a bad example because he's divinely protected. I can't just as a mage. I can't just be like, you know what? I don't like King Henry. I've heard bad things about him. I'm just gonna put a curse on him. I can't just go in my lab and then just curse King Henry, even though I've never met the guy. I need a connection. I need a lock of hair. I need his favorite shirt. I need his blood. I need something. Something that can cake your spell and connect it to the target. The limit of creation is unique to Creo Magic. When you make something with Creo Magic, you are making something out of nothing. So that means that the thing's true nature is nothingness. So when the spell ends, the thing will disappear. So here's the funny thing. If I use Creo Magic and I make water and I drink that water, when the spell ends, the water ceases to exist. So I technically drank nothing, so I will still be thirsty. Um, and if I use magic to make a horse, like summon a horse with Creo Magic, Creo Animal, I'll make a horse and I can ride it and do stuff with it. But when the spell ends, it will disappear. Now, two funny consequences of this. One, let's say I did an experiment and I got a guy and I just, let's say I bought a horse, right? I buy a horse and I create food and water with magic every day to feed that horse. And I basically keep the horse very well fed. So before it even gets a chance for my old spell to end, where it would feel hungry again because all that stuff is gone, I feed it again. And I keep doing that for like a year or two. And then I just stop using magic and I try to give it real food. The second the spell ends, all of its body at this point has been made up by fake material, so it would almost instantly die and probably even just like disintegrate a little bit. And the inverse of that is, let's say I magic a horse, right? I use Creo Magic and I make a fake horse and I feed it real food and I keep the spell going for years, right? The thing is, its life, it doesn't have a soul. It's fueled by magic. So the second I end the spell, it will die. But if I fed it real food and water for a long enough period of time, its body and blood will be real. So I'll still have a horse's body. It'll just drop dead because I cut off the spell. So yeah. The limit of energy. Hermetic magic cannot restore one's physical energy or fatigue levels, nor can it restore confidence. Most magic, I think it's a flaw in hermetic theory. So this is one of those things that technically, like the rules, the 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 creators of the game are basically saying this is not actually a limit of magic. It is a limit we are implying as the game makers for balance purposes. Because a lot of magic can absorb or take up physical energy or confidence or something as basically a payment method in order to get bonuses or whatever. So if you could then have a spell that then also gave those back, you could make an infinite feedback loop, and they're like, no, no. Limit of the Infernal. Intelligo magic is almost completely useless against the Infernal because it reveals only what the demons want you to believe, whether that is true or not. This is a limit of the Divine. So basically, demons are real, of course, in this world, and demons are fallen angels. And demons are beyond you, and their nature, their essential nature, effectively, is deception, is to trick you and tempt you. So if you tried to use magic to look past the illusion of whatever they are, so like a demon shows up and they're disguised as a beautiful woman, and you try to use magic to see past the illusion, it's not going to work because they're a demon. Their nature is to trick you, so your magic will fail. It just will see what they want you to see. you know you can't really learn anything from them. You can't get true knowledge out of them through force because it's just you just can't. um Oh yeah, and then they point out heretical magi point out that thanks to this limit, there is no way to tell the difference between God and a very powerful demon. You can't. There's nothing you. They're also, because they are technically like part of the divine, sort of, even though they're fallen, they're also resistant to magic. So, like, if you run into a really powerful being that is completely resistant to your magic, and when you try to use like magic to like see past illusions, you just see them and you can't find anything. You have no way of knowing, is this God or is this just a really powerful demon? And you just kind of have to make that judgment call based on how they act. Limit of the lunar sphere. This one's hilarious. Magic cannot affect the lunar sphere, meaning the moon, literally the moon, nor anything above it. Most magic, I think, this derives from the limit of the divine. The lunar sphere is the innermost of the celestial spheres, which can carry the stars and planets on their revolutions around the Earth, and so this limit rarely bothers magi. This is complicated and doesn't make sense unless you actually have like read or at least seen a synopsis of Dante's Paradiso, or have an understanding of like medieval cosmology. So the old medieval idea was the geocentric system. The Earth's the center of the universe, and the universe revolves around the Earth. And in this interpretation, especially, I'm pretty sure this is drawing a little bit from Dante's Paradiso. Uh, the moon is technically like the first layer of heaven in the Bible. Or not in the Bible, in the Paradiso. In Paradiso, it says that basically the moon is the first layer of heaven, and then each of the planets is another layer of heaven, and then you get to the fixed stars, which is a layer, and then there's like beyond the fixed stars, right? So In what this limit basically says is if you try to use magic to go to the moon or do something to the moon, it doesn't work. There's basically an upper limit in the atmosphere of where your magic just kind of stops working. And there's not really an explanation as to why. Other than that it's probably because it's something to do with the divine. So this is one of those areas where you really get to decide what you want to do with it. If you want to run the universe that it is geocentric and that model is correct, then yeah, it's just that you can totally just steal Dante's idea and that the moon is literally just the first layer of heaven. So if you try to get there, it'd be like trying to break into fucking heaven, and it's past the pearly gates, spiritually speaking, and that's what's actually blocking magic. Or if you want to go a more heliocentric style, and that go with science, like the moon actually is just a celestial body in the sense that it's literally just a rock in space. You could totally say that like magic just doesn't work in space. Magic cannot go across a vacuum. Magic needs air as a medium of exchange or something, or that magic is like tied to the Earth's gravity or magnetic field or something, and like it can't go past that. Something like that. Limit of the soul: magic can't make a soul. If you use magic to create like an animal or something and make it alive, it won't actually be alive. It doesn't have a soul. And once you end the spell, it just ceases to exist, right? So you can't use magic to make or really do anything to the human soul. It's protected. It's sacrosanct. Um, yeah, hermetic magic can't raise the dead. Many think that the fact that it can't raise the dead is just a flaw in the theory, and that actually you can raise the dead. They just no one's figured it out yet. Um, So yeah, that's another one of those fun things where you kind of could play around with it, whether or not the soul is actually special and there's like a protection, like this divine protection. That's why you can't bring back the dead or do anything, or maybe there is a way to do it and it's just really complicated. The limit of time: magic cannot time travel. This is just a hard no time traveling. God said no. um, So if you want to do time travel in your game, then your version of God, I guess, in this universe is cool with it. But in general, mages do not know how to time travel. So yeah. The limit of true. This is the most fairy tale and fucking hilarious of them all. Um, Magic cannot interfere with the power of true love or true friendship or true faith. Effectively, there's a point where feeling wise you can love someone enough that magic has no sway over you anymore. Like at least over that. Like you can use a love spell, but like true love's kiss can break the curse. Stuff like that. Which is hilarious. They're like, yeah, we gotta have some fairy tale shit right there. So because that's the point. Limit of Vis: hermetic magic cannot change the art to which raw Vis is attuned. Most magic, I think, it's the essential nature, blah, blah. So yeah, so like I said, the whole thing with Vis, right, is that when you find Vis, it's tied to one of those aspects, right? So it's tied to fire or water or whatever, right? You can't change that. So if I want to do fire magic, I need fire Vis. And so that I gotta go out and get some fire V's, and I have to find it and go whatever the process is to get that. So it's a bit of a headache. And so this is a limit just to make sure that the you players can't be like, well, we have a shit ton of Earth V's, so just convert it. No, you can't convert it. And the limit of warping. This is tied to the whole Twilight thing. I said it wrong before. So when you go into Twilight, it's because you attained warping. Like your essence has been warped by magic, and so that's what causes you to go into Wizard's Twilight. And magic cannot fix that. Once you've attained warp, like any amount, you can't get rid of it. No amount of magic, no amount of spells or rituals will ever be able to remove the warp. It's just you just can't. The warping effectively becomes part of your essential nature. So again, the lesser limits are the things that, like, if you really want to, you could probably make exceptions to them, but generally speaking, they're supposed to still be hard rules, while the greater limits, the true limits, are things that, like, as far as the writers of the game are concerned, this is just how magic works, right? So don't break this. Don't let a fireball hurt God, and don't let someone just permanently turn a guy into a rat with no consequences, right? Um, there is hypothetically magic that can change or add on to someone's true nature, but that's complicated. Like the Bjornair, who can get their spirit animals, that animal that they become because it's part of their journal is also part of their true nature. So when they turn into an animal, it doesn't like cause warping or impact them in any negative way. There's no consequences for the shape shifting, and they don't really need to like maintain it. They can just do it. So that is the basis of magic. There's the math I'm not going to go into, but it really isn't that complicated, and it just goes into, you got ritual, formulaic, spontaneous. There's different systems and stuff, and it's basically just determine the variables, add them all together. There's your magic, right? That's really all it is. Um, that's pretty much everything. Oh, the last two things. I already explained the magic resistance, that you need Parma Magica to like actually resist. Otherwise, you just kind of can't. It's really difficult. But sigils. This is the second part of Ars Magica magic that is very unique and very interesting. It's very flexible. Sigils are basically a calling card. It's a sign or thing that happens or is otherwise a side effect of your magic. So every wizard, every mage has a sigil. Uh, they actually call it a sigil specifically because when you become a mage, they take whatever your sigil is, like your side effect for magic, and they turn it into a physical sigil, which is like a stamp, so that you can use for voting purposes. But it's decided based on what your magical sigil is, which is, so let's say there's a mage. Actually, here, let's see the example they give here. For example, a maga, a female mage, might have the scent of orange blossom as her sigil. In that case, whenever she casts a spell, there's a smell of orange blossom in the area. The spell has its effect as normal. Another maga sigil might make everyone nearby feel briefly chilled. Give everyone just like that chill up their spine, right? So basically, a sigil can be almost anything so long as it's effectively harmless. It's a sensory experience related to your magic. So maybe when you do magic, your hair changes color, or the air fills with a smell, or you're engulfed in ethereal flames, or maybe the grass starts to kind of burn around you and change color. Maybe the sky starts to darken a little bit. But it's still local, right? It's just a thing around you and what people see or experience when they witness you doing magic. And it can be anything. And it can be anything. The rules don't hard restrict you on what this can be. Your limitations are really just that whatever your sigil is, it can't have a statistical effect on anything, right? Your sigil can't literally be to like set things around you on fire, right? Your sigil can't be to like cause people around you to become nauseous and vomit profusely or whatever. It has to be small enough that it doesn't really affect anything other than flavor from a storytelling mechanic purposes. So maybe they are ignited in a celestial, or not celestial, like a magical aura, like fucking DBZ style or something, or like a lot of other anime shit. Or maybe it's like this said, a smell. Maybe like the air suddenly smells like vanilla ice cream, even though that doesn't exist in this setting yet. Or whatever, right? You just pick something. So when you make your mage, you'll do your stats, pick your sigil, get creative. Really think about what you want your sigil to be and have it really be defined by your character to some degree. It can be very interesting. Um, there's Cardamon. Cardamon is basically wizard duels. If two wizards get in a scuffle and they can't settle their differences peacefully, they can enter into a duel, which is like recognized by the tribunal and such. So it's like, okay, you guys are gonna do a duel. Whoever wins, and that you have to do whatever it is. Like maybe two wizards are fighting over which of them gets the apprentice in the divorce, and they do Cardamon to decide. Something like that, right? There's rules here about how to do it, how it works, blah blah blah. And the mysteries. Last thing about magic, I think that matters. So the mysteries are part of the way magic is unique. So in Ars Magica, besides the fact that you can learn those systems I cited before with the verbs and nouns, there's additional supernatural abilities in magic you can learn called mysteries. Uh, In this case, like the Bjornair's Heart Beast, where they have the spirit animal they can shapeshift into, there's other houses with other magical, supernatural traditions that provide additional, unique abilities beyond the standard system. Usually they get around some limitation of the system in some clever way. So like Bjornair kind of gets a little bit around the essential nature thing by basically adding a secondary essential nature by giving you that animal spirit. Um, there are some expanded books that add in additional sort of alternative magic systems that are still part of the core magic system but have their own like additional abilities or spells or stuff or unique workarounds that they can do. Um, like there's alchemy, there's necromancy. It doesn't bring back the dead per se, but it does allow you to commune with like ghosts as well as like animate corpses and stuff, and a few other things. And a few other things that I'm not going to really get too deep into. But yeah, so the mysteries basically you join a house in this case. So Kriamon and Marinetta, you learn their particular quirky magic, and you get their additional perks and abilities. Fairy magic lets you do all kinds of fairy related things. So like you get additional modifiers you can apply to your spells. So uh, here like this, so like bargain, you can make deals, so to speak, so the duration of the spell is forever to however long the bargain lasts for, rather than the normal limitation of like, oh, it lasts a month, it lasts a year, it lasts 2 minutes or whatever. Or uh or you can have a conditional duration, so it's like, okay, this spell will last until blank, which is kind of hilarious. So because like, okay, for those who have watched Game of Thrones, hypothetically a condition you could set would be like the spell will last until the sun rises in the east and sets in the west and the mountains have turned into dust, and shit like that. Just, stuff that is impossible. Although, then as players, maybe they find a quirky workaround to make it technically true, even though it's not, and so it works. Year and a day, it's another fairy tale thing. Oh, oh. Target bloodline. You target not just a person, but everyone they're related to, and every one of their descendants forever. It's a fucking blood curse. It's great. Veritas magic is magic around items, so it's the ability to craft magic items and imbue items with magical properties that they can do magic and spells and stuff on their own. Yeah. So in Ars Magica, uh, this book has everything you realistically need, but if you want additional content, there are some additional source books that provide all kinds of fun things. There are the Realms of Power books, which provide additional player character options as far as magical abilities and such around the different realms of power. And what that means is that in this world, there are generally considered four types of supernatural forces you can call upon. You've, of course, got magic, which is this. Then you've got fairy power, which is its own thing. If you actually go through the fairy book, it uses its own kind of rules and logic about how the supernatural works, and they don't use the techniques and forms in here. Um, then you have the divine, of course, which has true faith, so you can literally be like a saint, basically, or like a prophet, and get your powers from God, so to speak. Like you cast actual miracles and shit. It has a lot of fun options, and it has unique sort of magical faith-based power options and abilities based around all of the major Abrahamic faiths, so Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which is pretty cool. And then Infernal, which is demon-based, so it's if you are basically a proper warlock, you're making a deal with a demon to get extra power. You've sold your soul to the dark forces for, you know, magical superiority and shit. It's really a book really more for the GM to make fun villains, but like, hey, if your players want to go that route, you get that book, you have that as an option. Now, I will say there is one sad downside to this game, and that is that it is effectively out of print. If you wanted to get physical copies of all the books, you are not going to be able to do that. The core book and a handful of the more popular expansions you can still find physical printings of if you go looking around, and the actual Atlas Games website does still sell many of the books, but the Realms of Power books, the Divine and Infernal Realm of Power books, I could not find anywhere. I own a good number of these books physically, and I have Fairy and Magic Realms of Power and a few other books, but I could not find a copy of Divine or Infernal with a reasonable price tag to save my life. All of them were like I think the only copy I found of the Divine from physical was like $2,000. So because it's a collector's item at that point. They might, by the time, I mean, at some point in the future, they might do a reprinting. But as the time of recording this, as far as I'm aware, no reprinting. So many of the books are just kind of only available digitally. Now, I have gone and acquired basically, I think, most of the books that I care about, including the Realms of Power books, digitally. So I bought the PDFs, but I don't necessarily, but I don't think I'll have the physical books anytime soon. So unless they reprint them, I don't know. Maybe I'll just print out my own copy and bind it myself. I don't know. It's not like you need physical books, but I like physical books. So that is Ars Magica. That is a very, very sporadic summary of the entire game that I did over the last hour and a half. I will cut this down as best I can into bits, remove my little gaps where I stopped to breathe and or had interruptions and or rambled about something nonsensically. But yeah, if you think this game might be for you, check it out. I think it's really good. I think more people should play it, and there's a pretty decent community on Reddit. You know, people talk about this game and share their ideas, and it's just such a unique crossing of just being a history nerd with, still getting to play proper tabletop games. I think if the day comes I actually get a table to group to play this, I want to heavily focus on that historical element and really go to town on like, having the players be involved or heavily influenced by some major historical event. The default year is 1220, but I don't know, maybe I would jump the timeline forward a little bit and set it in like, the late 1400s Renaissance period, so it could be like, maybe like the first covenant in America. I think that could be a really fun story. Like, hey, Columbus came back and talking about some new islands out across the Atlantic. Let's go ahead and sail out there. And, then the wizards are like, oh man, there's a whole new continent here with new people and new magic to discover. Let's go ahead and set up let's set up a covenant, a colony basically, and start talking to the natives and figure out how their magic works. See if they want to join the order. Oh, that'd be horrible in a way, but it'd be interesting. I don't know. This is a great system if you really wanted to play like a Harry Potter RPG. Like if you love Harry Potter and you wanted to experience Harry Potter as a tabletop game. I've seen a lot of people that have done things like that for like D&D and shit, but the problem with those games is they're built around having a balanced party where you have a fighter and a rogue and a wizard and a cleric to some degree, right? It's meant to be variety. You're not supposed to have a party of all wizards. Like you can do that, but it's not built for that. This is built for that. This is built with the idea that you're just all fucking wizards. And actually, if you get this and you get the book for apprentices, so that you can play, an apprentice, you could straight up just make Harry Potter. Just literally rip almost all the rules here and just set it in semi-modern times. Set it in the 1800s. Just get it away from the main Harry Potter story, and boom, play apprentices at wizard school at Hogwarts. It fits perfectly fine. And that's all I'll say about that. You all have a wonderful day. This has been DM Joe.